It's really an honor and a privilege to introduce to you uh, Dr. Peter Gray. I'm sure many of you know of him, and I know I have, going back many years ago when I read his first book. And it was important for me to learn about the importance of play, especially unstructured play in kids' life. Well, Peter Gray is a research professor of psychology and neurosciences at Boston College, who has conducted and published research in behavioral biology, developmental psychology, anthropology, and education. He's author of an internationally acclaimed introductory psychology textbook. I did not know that. Psychology, worth publishing, was worth publishers was edition 126, which use all of psychology form and evolutionary perspective. Much of his research focuses on the role of play in human evolution and how children's education themselves through play and exploration. He has expanded on this idea in his book, Free to Learn, why unleashing the instinct of play will make our children happier, more self reliant, and better student for life. This book has been translated into 18 languages. He also author of a Substack series entitled Play Makes Us Human. He is one of the founders of the nonprofit Let Go, letgo.org, the mission of which is to renew children's freedom to play and explore independently of adult control. You can follow him on Facebook and find many of his publication articles on his website, petgray.org. Well, what Peter is going to talk to us about is Mother Nature's prescription for mental well-being, the power of play, and other self-directed activities. Dr. Gray, it's an honor and privilege to have you with us tonight.
Thank you. Is this mic working all right? I prefer to use a fixed mic rather than hold one.
Oh, is it?
Is it turned on?
Oh, we can take it out and put this one on. All right, good.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm an evolutionary psychologist, which means that I'm interested in human nature. I'm interested in how our human nature came about by natural selection. And for many years, I've been most interested in the nature of children, and especially in those aspects of children's nature that has to do with their education and development. School is a new thing from an evolutionary perspective. Education is not new. Development is not new. Culture is not new. We have been a cultural animal as long as we've been Homo sapiens. And culture is spread because children acquire the culture, not because adults pass it on to children. Children, children come into the world biologically designed to figure things out, to practice in play the things that they see are important in the culture that they're growing up in, and to practice in play all of those things that are important to human beings everywhere, such as how to get along with other people. That's why kids want to play with other kids. Such as how to solve your own problems, how to take initiative. These are the kinds of things that are most important to learn, and they can't be taught. They cannot be taught. They can only be learned in practice, and play is that practice, largely speaking. So you have a handout for the talk. I don't use slides, but instead you have a handout which gives an outline of what I'm going to talk about on the first page. And on the second page are some references if you want to follow up on any of these ideas. So the premise of my talk is that children need increasing amounts of independent activity, meaning activity not guided and monitored and directed by adults as they grow older. The purpose of childhood, the purpose of what biologists call the juvenile period in all mammals, is to become increasingly independent of parents. And to do that, they have to practice becoming increasingly independent of parents as they're growing up. My contention is, and I don't think I even need to support this because it's pretty obvious, that we are not allowing children to do that today. We are in their face all the time. We're not allowing them to go out and solve their own problems, to get in trouble and figure out how to get out of trouble, to deal with bullies and figure out how to deal with bullies. We're not allowing them to learn that they can solve their own problems. And as a consequence, they're growing up feeling uh, a lack of self-control, a lack of what psychologists would call an internal locus of control. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as I go along. So I want to begin, if you look at the handout, to begin from, we're an A on the handout at this point, a historical analysis. So when I talk about over the past 70 years, I'm talking about my lifetime. I've actually been on the planet for 81 years. And so to some degree, I'm talking about a history that I've lived. But I'm not going to have you rely just on my memories of that history. But I might start by saying that when I was 4 years old, I lived in Minneapolis. My family lived in Minneapolis. My grandmother was the stay-at-home parent at that time. My mother at that time was a single mom. And my grandmother had trouble walking. She would send me 2 blocks away in a busy street in Minneapolis to buy cigarettes for her and bring them back to her. So I just say that nobody batted an eye. Maybe they did. Can't say I remember that from age 4, but that was among my best first memories. And I think it was important because I felt so grown up doing that. I felt so grown up. Even when my son was a kid at age 5, by age 5, and he started kindergarten, this would have been in the 1970s, he could walk to kindergarten, he could walk to school, You don't see that now. We are not allowing kids to do things that kids are perfectly capable of doing. And by not allowing them to do that, we are teaching them that they are incapable. We are teaching them that they don't have internal power, that they are dependent upon other people to do their things for them and solve problems for them. So over time, there have been various historical analyses of children's lives over time. One book that is worth reading is by Howard Chudikoff on the history of children's play in America. And Chudikoff argues that the first half of the 20th century was the golden age for play for children in America. Because by the beginning of the 20th century, we had pretty much gotten rid of intensive child labor. We went through a terrible period of history of the industrial age where children were sometimes almost slaves in sweatshops and so on and so forth. But by the beginning of the 20th century, we had more or less solved that problem. We did have compulsory schooling in most states by that time, but it was not the big deal that it is today. It took much less of children's time. There was much less pressure about it than there is today. So what Chudikoff argues is that beginning about 1955, adults began to take over children's lives. So up until about 1955, children had a lot of autonomy. Children had a lot of opportunity to play, to explore, to be children. to be very much the way children live in hunter-gatherer cultures, where they are spending huge amounts of time on their own playing and exploring in age-mixed groups. So, but beginning about 1955, we began gradually taking children's freedom away. Not all at once, just gradually. There were a whole set of changes that occurred. Schooling day became longer. The schooling, today, the average school year in the United States is 5 weeks longer than it was when I was in elementary school in the 1950s. I've actually looked up that data. The school day is longer now, but even more significant than that is when you add homework to all of that. The school has become, we thought we were getting rid of child labor, but school has become a full-time job for kids. It's become the worst kind of full-time job for kids, a sedentary one. And then we wonder why it is that our kids are suffering from lack of exercise, among other things. So we gradually took over children's lives and in various other ways over time. There's another book that I would recommend reading, looking at. This is a little known book, and I only discovered it a while ago, even though it was written about 15 years ago, by Markella Rutherford, called Supervision Required. And what she did was to do a qualitative analysis of articles in magazines for parents that have been published. Magazines have been continuously published for the past 100 years or so or longer, such as Parent Magazine, Good Housekeeping Magazine. And so she identified all the articles written for parents as well as letters from parents and did a qualitative analysis. When you look at the letters and advice to parents up until about 1960 and even up until the 1970s, a lot of the advice had to do with how important independent activity is for your kids. Your kid is not walking to kindergarten. Your kid should be walking to kindergarten. And here's some things you could do to help encourage them to do that. There was a lot of that. And then, as she points out, some beginning, somewhat gradually, but as he got into the 1980s, instead of sort of portraying children as tough and resilient, children began to be portrayed as fragile and constantly needing adult attention and guidance. There was this at first kind of subtle shift, and then increasingly so, and then it almost became all about guiding children, the role of adults in guiding children, teaching children, protecting children, and so on and so forth. So this change occurred gradually. If it had occurred all at once, it couldn't possibly occur. People would just rebel. If you went to the amount of schooling that I had, and suddenly you said, we're going to add 5 more weeks of schooling, we're going to start giving a couple hours of homework every night, we're going to reduce recess to 15 minutes a day, and the lunch hour is no longer an hour, it's 20 minutes. You did that, and you would have rebellion. But it happened slowly. It happened slowly. It creeped up so that every generation of parents, it wasn't that different from the previous generation. This is how toxic things arise in the culture. They arise gradually and people don't notice them. So those things change. So what are the causes of the decline? One of the causes that I've just described is the increase in schooling. Not only the increased amount of time of schooling, but the increased pressure of schooling, the importance of grades, the competitiveness of it, which itself is a source of anxiety for children. The other thing that happens, we develop, I think partly because of the influence of school, we develop what I call a schoolish view of child development. The schoolish view is that children develop best when they're carefully guided and protected by adults. And so we put children in school-like activities even when they're not in school. We put them, instead of just sending them out to play, we put them in adult-directed sports, which is kind of like more school. There's an adult there telling them what to do, judging what they're doing, solving their problems for them, and so on and so forth. Instead of just going out and making up their own games, they're being put into a situation where adults are controlling what they are doing. So those changes. We also, over time, and this accelerated in the 1980s, developed irrational fears about the dangers out there. We developed this concept of stranger danger. There are strangers lurking around the corner. They're going to snatch your child away. This is an extraordinarily rare event. Not that it doesn't occur, everything occurs at some point when there's millions and millions of people. But this is an extraordinarily rare event. But because it was so publicized, it became a reason that parents felt like I'm a bad parent if I let my child walk to school by themselves or go out and play in the park with their friends without an adult there guarding them all the time. We have the situation now. We live in a perfectly safe area now in a suburban area in Massachusetts. There are kids living there. I never see them outside except when they're waiting at the bus stop with their parents standing right there at the bus stop until the school bus comes. Well, what has happened to us? What is our view about children's capacities? And what lesson are we telling to children when we do that, when we constantly have to stand there and protect them all the time as if they are completely incompetent themselves? And if the world is so dangerous, we're kind of teaching them the world is dangerous, and it's really not that dangerous. So that's part of what's happened. In my new book, I go through about 15 different societal changes between about 1950 and now, all of which have had the effect of reducing children's freedom to play and be independent and basically be children. So over this same 70-year period that we've taken children's freedom away, we have seen a gradual but overall huge decline in children's mental health, which should not be surprising. The rate of suicide among teenagers, and actually, even though there's relatively few suicides among children, the rate among younger children, this is also true, increased fourfold between 1950 and the end of the 20th century. There are ways of estimating the extent of what would be called today major depressive disorder or clinically significant anxiety disorders based on certain standardized clinical questionnaires that were given to normative groups over the years. So, for example, the MMPI has a scale assessing depression. There's another test that assesses generalized anxiety. People have analyzed those scores from normative groups over time. And if you look at what would be the cutoff score for suspected major depression on the depressive scale or suspected clinically significant generalized anxiety disorder on the anxiety scales, the estimates range between 5 and 8-fold increases in these over this period of time among young people. So this has been a huge change in the rates of anxiety, depression, suicide over the same period of time that we have been increasingly trying to protect children from any kind of accidents, any kind of even emotional disturbances, because we're always watching them and guiding them. So the so over this 70, so I want to, so I'm going to talk about what various reasons for thinking that there's a cause and effect. What I've just described is a correlation, which of course doesn't by itself prove cause and effect. That the correlation is over time, we've seen dramatic decline in children's freedom. And over that same period of time, we've seen dramatic increases in all sorts of psychopathology among children. So I'm arguing that the one is the cause of the other, but of course the correlation itself doesn't prove it. Before I go into more talking about what evidence for the cause-effect relation, I wanted to say what I mean by play. So play is a word that, like a lot of English words, that we use with different kinds of meanings. And so people use the word play in ways that don't necessarily fit what I would call play. And so I'm going to define play. I've got on your handout 4 defining characteristics of play. Play is an activity that has the 4 characteristics that I list there. This is the definition I have. It's very close to the definition that most other play scholars have, that people who study play. And it also turns out, I'm not going to do a teal, but when you do studies to try to understand exactly what children mean by play, it fits pretty much with their definition of play also. So the first defining characteristic of play is that it is self-chosen and self-directed. So right off, if an adult stands up and says, now children are all going to play this, you know it's not play. One of the fundamental purposes of play from an evolutionary perspective is for children to learn how to create and direct their own activities. In non-play life, adults are in charge. In play, children are in charge. The purpose of play is for children to learn how to be in charge, to take charge, to solve their own problems. And if there's an adult there doing it for them, it undermines this major evolutionary purpose of play. So I said that play is self-chosen and self-directed, but it's also the case that throughout the world, children almost always prefer to play with other children. We see a lot of solitary play in our culture because we don't allow children to get together very much. But in a normal culture where children can easily congregate with one another, they can just go outdoors and find other kids to play with. Children usually play with other kids. Social play with other kids is normal play. So the so so what does it mean if I say that it's self-chosen, self-directed? That means that a group of kids has to decide together what they're going to play. They have to decide together how they're going to play. Watch any kids playing, and you see that they spend, in many cases, more time negotiating the play than they actually do playing. Now, that's not a waste of time. What are they learning when they're doing that? They're learning how to compromise, how to negotiate, how to take their playmates' needs into account. They're learning how to create rules. They're learning things that are important for all of life. And if you've got an adult there doing that for them, you're undermining that possibility. Children learn empathy in play. Talk about socio-emotional development. They learn to pay attention to their playmates. And the reason is because the most important freedom in play is freedom to quit. So if you and I are kids and we get together playing a game and I'm kind of a bully, I want you to do exactly what I tell you to do. And you're a self-respecting child, you'll say, I hear my mom calling, I'm going home. So that is a natural consequence for my not paying attention to your needs. Over time, presumably, it doesn't happen with everybody, but over time, most kids learn because they really want to play with other kids. Most kids learn in order to play with other kids, I've got to pay attention to them. I've got to hear them. I've got to take them into account. I've even got to pay attention to the subtle nonverbal cues as to whether they are happy or not. Because if they're not happy, then there's a chance they're just going to leave me here and I'm going to be alone. This is Mother Nature's way of teaching social emotional development. We think we have to teach it to kids. And the reason we think that is we've taken away their chance to learn it in Mother Nature's natural way for them to learn it. So that's that's the first characteristic. The second characteristic of play is it's intrinsically motivated. So to the degree that somebody's doing something for a gold star or a grade on a report card or a trophy or praise from a coach or a parent, to the degree that you're doing it for that, for some extrinsic end, it's not play. Play is something that you're doing just because you want to do it. Right off, maybe you can see why play is a key to happiness. Play is doing what makes you happy, right? You take away play and you're going to be less happy. This should be kind of a no-brainer, right? I mean, if we wonder why kids are less happy now. So that's part of it. But in addition to that, what else are kids learning when they're playing? Because they're learning what they like to do. They play at various things. They discover some things they really like to play at this. They become really good at it. They play it over and over again. I've studied kids who have had the opportunity to study kids who have lots of opportunity to play, going to alternative schools where they have much more opportunity to play and play with other kids than most kids have. And I found that of those kids, about 50% of them, I can see very clearly they are as adults in careers that are direct extensions of what they played at as kids. They got really interested in something, passionate about it, good at it, and then said, can I figure out a way to make a living doing that? And I could give countless examples of that. I have some examples in my book, Free to Learn, and more examples in some of my published articles. So that's another thing. Children are learning about themselves. They're learning what they like to do. You know, in school, everybody's doing the same thing. And a lot of it isn't what anybody likes to do. So that's so we're taking away children's opportunity. You know how commencement speakers talk about follow your passions. How do you even know what a passion is if you haven't had a life of play? Play is following your passions. Play is doing what you're interested in doing and becoming good at that. So that's the second characteristic of play. The third characteristic of play is that play has rules. So people talk about unstructured play, and Adel mentioned unstructured play. I won't criticize him for that, but I don't use the word unstructured play because play is always structured, but it's structured by the kids themselves. So play is never random activity. When kids are playing, they are playing at something. They're not, they're playing at something. They're making a sandcastle. That's a structured activity. They're not just randomly piling up sand, but it's structured by mental rules, by mental guidelines that the child, or if it's a group of children, that they have collectively in their heads. We're making a sandcastle, and sandcastles have this, and there's a moat around it, and they are learning to structure their own activities. They're learning how to control their impulses in order to reach a certain goal. The goal is only interesting internally to the play. They're not making the sandcastle because they want to have a sandcastle to take home and keep forever. They're making the sandcastle because it's fun to make a sandcastle, even though they know it's going to be washed into the sea when the tide rises. But it has a goal and they want to do it well. Children, when they're playing, they are at the cutting edge of their abilities because it's only fun if you're trying to do it well. That's what makes it fun, whatever they're playing at. This idea that play has rules, even the most, what might look like the wildest kind of play, has rules. So imagine a couple of boys in a play fight. They're swinging sticks at one another, they're pushing one another down, they're wrestling. It looks absolutely wild. But if you watch long enough, or if you remember playing this way, or if you ask one of the boys, you'll know there are clear rules. You can hit the other person's stick, but not the person. You can, if you push somebody down, you push them down on something soft. If you're the bigger, stronger of the two, you self-handicap, and so on. No kicking, no biting, no scratching. Usually the rules don't even have to be stated. They're implicit, especially if these boys have been playing together before. But if one of them happens to break it, either accidentally or on purpose, it will be stated, hey, that really hurt. You hit me with that stick. I'm out of here if that happens again. That's how children learn to follow rules. That's how children learn to inhibit their impulses. I think there's a lot of reasons for the high diagnosis of ADHD. Mostly it's diagnosing normal behavior as pathological. But I think there may be something to this. There are some people who have argued, some researchers who have argued that play deprivation is one of the reasons that kids aren't learning how to control their impulses. Play is nature's way of teaching children how to control their impulses because you have to behave in accordance to the expectations of what you're doing when you're playing by the norms and rules of that type of that play that you're involved in. So the fourth characteristic of play is that although play has rules, the rules are never dictate exactly what you have to do. There's always lots of room for creativity in play. And play is the most creative thing anybody ever does. Creativity, almost by definition, is playful because in play, your mind expands. You can take on something, a stick can be a horse. Things, things that have a certain role in the real world can have a very different role in the play world. You're imagining this, you're imagining that. Imagination is the key to all higher order thinking. Imagination is the key to hypothetical deductive reasoning. Piaget argued that children aren't capable of hypothetical deductive reasoning until they're about 11 or 12 years old, but he was wrong. And anybody who has watched little children play knows that. When children are playing a fantasy game and they're playing make believe, what researchers call sociodramatic play, they engage in hypothetical deductive reasoning all the time. So one child says, looking at the kitchen table, there's a that's a bridge. And another child says, there's a troll under the bridge. Hypothesis, right? There's a troll under the bridge. And another child says, well, we better give the troll a cookie so it doesn't eat us. Deduction, hypothetical deductive reasoning. 4-year-olds are capable of hypothetical deductive reasoning when they're involved in play, and they're practicing it all the time in play. So, so what I've tried to do is to tell you play is not a waste of time. Play is how children are practicing the most important skills that people have to learn. The other thing I could say about play, but I'm not going to belabor it here, because is that in any given culture, children play especially at the skills that they can see are important to that culture. So hunter-gatherers play at hunting and gathering. Kids in farming cultures play with farming equipment. Kids in our culture, what do they play with? They play with computers. Of course they do. It is obviously the most important tool of our culture. And children are naturally, instinctively drawn to look around, see what it is that people do in the culture that they're growing up in, and play at that to become good at it. So, but that of course they don't play just at those things. They play at a wide range of things as they go along. Okay, so I have a on C on the handout. Oh, I want to say something too. I added this in because this is a conference on movement and the relation of movement to emotion. And so I want to say something about the special value of outdoor vigorous play. So, but throughout history, most play was outdoors. Hunter-gatherer play is all outdoors. They don't really have it indoors. They've got huts that they sleep in, but it's all outdoors. In the 1950s, most play was outdoors for a lot of reasons. One of them was that I actually looked up this data. The average house was 1/5 the size of, I'm sorry, 1/4. Let me put it this way. The average house today is 2.5 times the size of the average house in the 1950s. That's a huge increase. The average number of kids in a family that has kids is half what it was. That means the amount of square feet indoors per kid has increased fivefold between 1950 and now, meaning there's a lot less reason to kick the kids out of the house because they could just go to their bedroom and they're out of your hair by doing that. There's less reason for the kids to get out of the house because they could just go to their bedroom and get away from their parents that way. So that's one change that's occurred. In addition, the other thing that Chudikov attributes to why the 1950s was sort of the tipping point was television, which began to bring kids indoors. So I remember I was 11 years old when we got our first television set, 1955, and the Mickey Mouse Club was on after school. And before that time, kids would hang out after school and they'd play until supper time. But then they started going home to watch the Mickey Mouse Club or other things on television. So that reduced the opportunity for outdoor play. So there's a lot of things that happened that changed the nature of childhood over time. But the thing about outdoor play, the most universal play game everywhere among all mammals, not just human beings, is tag. I shouldn't say all mammals, but most mammals chase one another around. Predators chase one another around because they're practicing chasing down. Prey animals chase one another down because they're practicing getting away from predators. So you see that, so tag is the universal game. Kids play tag everywhere. Versions of tags. We played endless amounts of various versions of tags. I remember I grew up mostly in northern Minnesota. We'd play a game called Fox and Geese on the frozen lakes. We shovel off pathways, and it's just a version of tag. The fox has to catch the geese, and then if you get caught, then you're a fox and have to chase the others. All these chasing games. You didn't have to worry about giving kids calisthenics or having to run around tracks. They got exercise in this the way that Mother Nature designed for them to get exercise. All kids play tag if they have the opportunity to do so. If there's lots of other kids to play with and other kids are doing this. But we have prevented them from doing that. So we think we're going to cure this problem by having them, jog or do exercises or do calisthenics or things like that. I'm not against that because until we solve the problem the other way, this may be the only way some of them are getting exercise. But we're not going to completely solve the problem because the fact of the matter is kids don't particularly like to do exercises. They'll do it when you're there standing them for to do it, but they don't particularly like to do it. I don't like to do it. I go out and play. I go out and garden and I chop wood because that's play for me. I go bicycling because it's play for me. I used to go out and play basketball before my knees got too bad and so on and so forth. When I talk to older people, I say, don't work out, play out. Figure out what it is that you like to do. Try different things if you don't already like them, but it involves some outdoor activity, but things that you, instead of forcing yourself to do it, you kind of have to force yourself not to do it because this is so much fun for you to do. So that's what I have to say. The other thing about outdoor play is that outdoors is so much easier to get away from adults. And for real play in this day and age, you almost have to get away from adults because adults are going to spoil it. Adults are going to tell you, don't climb that tree, it's too dangerous. Adults are going to tell you, don't walk up the slide is for sliding down. Adults are going to tell you, hey, stop that squabbling, and so on and so forth. And that prevents you from learning the lessons yourself. And it prevents you. There's actually studies back in the days when you still could find kids playing in the park without adults. There were studies done that showed when you're controlling for age, when you're controlling for background factors to the degree you can, when you've got a group of kids with no adult around, they're getting way more exercise than if there's an adult there monitoring them. Something about the adult there inhibits them, whether even if the adult isn't directly telling them not to do it, something about the adult inhibits them from playing in these really vigorous and somewhat risky ways. The other thing I want to say about outdoor play is that it turns out it's not just human children, but the young of most mammals play deliberately in risky ways. Why do they do that? So, for example, young chimpanzees have been observed to climb to the top of a tree and drop and catch themselves just before they hit the ground. And goat kids skip along the edges of cliffs in their play. Why don't they practice skipping someplace where it's safer? So the animal behaviorists have said, so, from an evolutionary point of view, this doesn't seem adaptive. Why do they play in these risky ways? Sometimes they get hurt. Sometimes an animal actually get killed playing this way. Same with human beings. So there must be some compensating advantage. And what could that compensating advantage be? And I think it's pretty obvious. Animal behaviorists came up with this before anybody began applying it to children. They're learning courage. They're practicing courage. They are practicing being in a situation where they experience a certain amount of fear and learning I can handle that fear. I can climb the tree that high and I can feel some trembling. I can feel some fear, but I came down alive. I can handle fear. And so as a result of playing in this way, when a real emergency occurs later on in life, they're not frightened of their own fear. They're not frightened. They've felt the trembling before. They've learned I can control my mind and I can control my body in the face of fear. They are in some sense titrating fear. They're climbing that tree just to the point where it's not yet terror, but it's beginning to get in that direction. The other thing I have to say about this only works when it's self-imposed and self-directed. A gym teacher who tells the kid to climb to the top of the gymnasium on a rope is not solving the problem. That may be inducing terror. The child themselves has to decide to do this, and ideally to decide to do it in a situation where they're not being judged. Nobody who potentially is a judge is watching them, and there's no sense of shame if they can't do it. So that's so let me go on now to reasons to believe that the decline of independent activity is a cause of the decline in well-being. So the first point I kind of have already made. You know, there's a famous play researcher, Brian Sutton Smith, who died a few years ago, who used to say in talks, the opposite of play is not work. The opposite of play is depression. I don't say that because the grammar doesn't work for me. But what I would say is that you take away play and you're going to get depression, because play is what makes you happy. Again, this is kind of a no-brainer. I mean, psychologists are always proving things that don't have to be proved, and there are actually some studies that indeed show that when you ask children, when you ask children to draw things or look at pictures and say, does this make you happy or not? By and large, what makes them happy is play. So play makes kids happy. You take it away, they're going to be less happy right off the bat. You have a big cause of what we see now as cause of depression among young people today. But there are other reasons for things. So let me go to a couple of theoretical reasons. So the concept of locus of control, internal locus of control. Clinical psychologists have long known that people who have this internal sense that they are in control of their own lives, that they can solve problems, that things can happen, but they can take care of them, that they're sort of in charge of their own destiny. This is an internal locus of control, even to the degree that they have it to an unrealistic extent. I mean, obviously, we can't control everything, but it turns out that to have this strong internal locus of control correlates with emotional well-being in other ways. So that people who have an external locus of control, who have this sense things can happen anytime and there's nothing I can do about it, I'm at the mercy of fate and luck and powerful other people. People who have that kind of an internal sense are far more likely, regardless of how old or young they are, far more likely to suffer from anxiety or depression in the future. And it makes sense. I mean, if things can happen and you can do nothing about it anytime, it's a pretty scary world. And at some point, it's a pretty depressing world. Helplessness, as I'm sure most of you know, is very akin to depression. So that's one. So how do you develop an internal locus of control? It turns out, no surprise, I mentioned that various clinical questionnaires of anxiety, depression had been given in normative groups over the last half of the 20th century. Similarly, a questionnaire on locus of control, internal versus external locus of control. Since that questionnaire was first developed in the 1960s, and towards the end of the 20th century, it was given to normative groups. Not surprisingly, over that period of time, internal locus of control dropped gradually, but overall by a huge extent, a full standard deviation drop between the 1960s and towards the end of the 20th century in internal locus of control. No surprise. I mean, how do you develop an internal locus of control if you never have control? Play is how you develop it. Play and other independent activities where you are in control is where you learn that I can solve problems, I can do things, I have an internal locus of control. So we have here a kind of a cause-effect sequence. Take away play and independent activity, you take away the possibility of a strong internal locus of control, you set people up for anxiety and depression. Another realm of psychology research is what's called basic needs theory. It's part of self-determination theory. And really, literally hundreds of studies have shown that there are three basic psychological needs that everybody needs to fulfill in order to feel mentally well. The three needs are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So autonomy is play. Play is autonomy. Take away play from children and you've taken away their autonomy. There's no place else where they're really free except in play. So play is how children experience autonomy, but also to some degree other independent activities. Competence. How do children develop competence? They develop it in play. The competence only matters if it's competence about something that they care about. And I said that children learn what they care about through play, and then they become good at it by playing it over and over, and they begin to feel competent, very good at doing that. That's how they develop competence. What about relatedness? How do kids make friends? For any kid under the age of 12, a friend almost by definition is somebody that you play with. That's how kids make friends. Take away play, and you've taken away the three basic psychological needs of children. Should it be surprising that taking away play makes children psychologically ill? Shouldn't be. It should be a no-brainer. It should be an absolute no-brainer. There should not be any need to convince anybody of this. It's so completely obvious. And we as a culture are so blind, so totally blind to this, what should be obvious. So that's but aside from theory, there's also lots of empirical evidence. This is all correlational. I know there's problems with correlational data that you don't know for sure what's cause and effect, but the correlations all go in the same direction. So, for example, there's quite a number of studies that go something like this. These studies are mostly with young children, usually 6 or 7 years old. And you determine how much for this set of children in this sample, you develop, you determine how much time each child has for independent activity, mostly play. Sometimes you do this by having a parent keep a diary of the child's activities. And basically what's being looked at is how much time during the day is this child in a situation where they're being guided and directed by an adult versus how much time are they in a situation where they're not being guided and directed by an adult. And when they break down what the child is doing, normally this is period for play. So they have that as one measure, and then they'll assess, independent of that, some kind of psychological characteristic. And so a couple of the first studies looked at, gave the children tests of executive functioning. These are basically tests of your ability to solve a problem and then work out and then consistently apply the rules. This is one of the forms of tests. Executive functioning is tested various ways. I know of at least 2 studies involving this procedure, and both of them showed, no surprise, that those kids who had more independent activity do better on tests of executive functioning than those who had less independent activity. We think that the more we guide children, the better they'll be able to do stuff. But the truth is, if we want them to do things independently of us, the less we guide them, the better they will be at doing things independently of us, like taking that test of executive functioning. There are also studies that go something like this, the same method for determining how much free time the child has. And then you use teachers' ratings for some characteristic, like there's one study where teachers were rating the kids for social maturity, social ability. Those kids who had more free time had better social ability by teachers' ratings. Another teachers' ratings of emotional regulation by teachers' ratings. Those kids who had more free time had better emotional regulation. And there are 2 or 3 others that I can't think of at the moment. But so far, every study I've been able to find of this sort shows that the less attention kids are getting from adults, the better they're doing on these kinds of tests. So there's another kind of study that is a retrospective study. So you find a bunch of adults and You assess these adults for various characteristics, like how happy are they, how do they rate themselves, do they seem to have a stable marriage, do they have good jobs, are they satisfied with life, and look at those kinds of things. Independently of that, you ask them to fill out a kind of autobiography of their childhood. And what you find in those studies, that what is found there, I know of two studies like this, is strong correlations that those who talk about the most independent adventures as children are the ones who are doing the best as adults. So again, a very different kind of study, but in the same direction. And then there's all these studies of helicopter parenting. So there are questionnaires that you can give to parents. Researchers even call them tests of helicopter parenting. I don't think it says helicopter parenting questionnaire on the top of the questionnaire, but it's a questionnaire of parental style, asking them questions basically about the ways that they would be helping their child or not helping their child, and so on and so forth, assessing the degree to which the parent is involved in the child's life in a kind of supervisory, overseeing, directive way. And this is done mostly with college kids, college age kids. And so independently of that questionnaire, you're looking at their psychological well-being in college, their adjustment to college. And again, those who were the least helicoptered as children are doing the best by all these other measures. Many studies of this sort. Again, all of these are correlations. Any one of these studies could be criticized on the cause-effect direction of the study. But I think when you bring all of this together, it becomes pretty overwhelming evidence that the less we do for kids, the better they do. That's a lesson that's hard for people to learn today. So so I want to end by talking about I've got about 10 minutes left. We're on E, how to bring more independent activity to children's lives in today's world. So I say different things when I speak to different audiences, but when I speak to parents, one of the things I say is one of the first things you should do is reduce their enrollment in adult-directed activities. Free up their time. They need time. One way to tell, I say to parents, so parents say, but my child likes to be in these activities. So I'll say, test it. And here's my suggestion for how to test it. If the child likes to be in it, the child will remember to remind you when the activity occurs. If you have to remind the child when it occurs, even if it's a 6-year-old, that means the child doesn't really want it. Children remember what they really want. You could tell your child one time, you could say, you've got to remember it, otherwise I'm not going to drive you there. That's one way. It's a real test. Children have good memories for what they want to do. They'll set a clock, or they'll tell you to remind them. We've done some studies sort of along that line related to what's called play club in schools, where children will remind their mother to get them up early so they could get to school in time for play club. So that's one thing. But reduce the amount. Their children spend way too much time. Their time is too scheduled. I mean, everybody says it. We all know this, but we don't do anything about it. We keep overscheduling them. We keep so that's what. The second thing we need to do is we have to find safe enough ways to bring kids together for play without adult intervention. We're not going to go back to the 1950s where you just kick the kid outdoors and there's going to be other kids outdoors to play with. Parents aren't going to do that. The society isn't going to tolerate it. Somebody's going to call 911 and say there's loose kids out there and their parents are negligent. So if you're going to have kids really playing, you've got to find settings that are safe and where there's going to be a group of kids, a regular group of kids who could become friends over time. One place this can happen is school. And so through the organization called Let Grow that Lenore Skenazy and I and a couple of others formed, we've been working with schools to have before school or after school play, free play, and the schools call it Play Club. And if it's an elementary school, all the kids in all the grades, kindergarten through fifth grade, are all playing together. There might be 100, 150 kids all playing together. Some schools do it before school. That's where the kids say to mom, be sure to get me there early. They love this. And there's all kinds of ways of playing, and there's no rules except don't deliberately hurt anybody and don't break anything important. And you have to stay within the large realm that is open for play. Most schools have the playground open, they have the gymnasium open, the hallway between the gym and the playground. And some of them also open up an art room for kids who want to play with art or put out puzzles, multiple ways of playing, all kinds of balls and hula hoops and loose parts and stuff to play with outdoors. Quite a number of schools have adopted this, and it's been a great success where it's occurred. Everybody wants to continue doing this. The differences between this and recess are stark. First of all, recess is typically these days only 15 or 20 minutes, not enough time really to get something going. This is a full hour. Recess is often very much controlled by the teachers. You can't do this or that. No throwing the ball here. No, no. And there's very little you can do in many recesses. Here, there's no limits on what you can do. The teachers who monitor recess are told, and when we first started this, I would tell them directly. I'd go out to the schools of the pioneering schools and say, while you're monitoring play club, you're not a teacher. You are like a lifeguard on an ocean beach. You're there for emergencies. You're not there to tell them how to play. You're not there to solve little squirrels. You're not there to worry about skinned knees or arguments. You're not there to cheer up the kid who looks sad. You are there just for emergencies. The whole point of play is for kids to figure out how to solve their own problems. I have not been surprised, but many people have been surprised to discover that the teachers monitoring play club almost never have to intervene. In fact, I was talking to one person who's been monitoring for 6 years, and he says he's never had to intervene. The kids always solve their own problems. And partly, I think it's because it's an age mixed group, but the older kids help solve the problems of the little kids. And that's so much more growth promoting for everybody, both the older kid and the younger kid, than if an authority figure stepped in and solved the problem. So Play Club is one thing. We're also working on play in libraries. There's some libraries that now have a play at the library, even both inside and outside the library. Working on various ways. We're trying to get more adventure playgrounds established in neighborhoods where, again, there's a play worker there. There's all kinds of loose parts and junk that kids can play with, and parents are not allowed in. That's a key part of all of this is keep the parents out, but parents will only stay out if they understand that there's somebody, a responsible adult there for safety. So we need to establish places like that. Another thing that we advise is both to parents, but we also do this in schools, is to talk with kids about what they would like to do independently that they have never done before. And this is when I talk to parents, I suggest, so why don't you have a discussion with your child like this? So, are the things that you would really kind of like to do that you've never really thought of doing, or maybe you thought I wouldn't allow you to do it, that you would really kind of like to do? And the child makes a list of them, and the mom maybe decides, it's usually the mom, decides which ones that she would allow the kid to do. And then the kid does it. And then everybody feels great about that. But we do something like that in schools where teachers who adopt this, it's called the Let Grow Challenge. Teachers will give their class an assignment to do something at home that they have never done before, but they have to do it independently, no adult. And they they think about what they would like to do. They make a list of things that they would like to do, and then they go home and introduce it to their parents. And they say, "So I've got this school assignment." Right off, the genius of this is it's a school assignment, so the parent has to take it seriously, right? So the kid goes home and says, "So I've got this school assignment. I need to do something independently and report back to what it is. And here's what I would like to do." So here's one actual example. A 10-year-old girl wants to ride her bicycle all by herself to her friend's house 2 blocks away. And the mom gasps and says, "No, that's too dangerous." So the other thing that happens in the class is some discussions about negotiation. If your parent doesn't want to do that, maybe talk about, is there some compromise thing? So then the girl says, well, how about if I just ride my bike around the block and you can sit on the stoop and watch me go around the corner and then watch me come back around the corner. And so the little girl does that. And what Lenore finds, because Lenore has seen this in person, I haven't watched it in person, she sees that when the little girl comes back, she's just beaming with pride for doing this thing that went all the way around the block on her bicycle, made it alive. She's beaming with, but the surprising thing is the mom is also beaming. The mom is proud that the daughter did this, and the mom is proud that she allowed her daughter to do it. So it breaks into the cycle of fear and creates a new cycle of pride in your child's accomplishments, pride in your child's strengths, rather than worry about your child's fragility and the dangers that your child is in. So I'm going to end at that point. I see that I am at the end of the hour. But if you are interested in more of these kinds of opportunities, you could go to the website of letgrow.org. I also write about these things on my Substack, which is easy to find. And my website, my personal website, petergray.org, are many of my published articles on these kinds of topics. So thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much. Why don't you just stay on the podium for a little bit? Why don't you just hang in there, see if there's some questions there? I know I have a bunch of questions, but I want to open it to the audience. Yeah.
Okay, so let me answer this question as an evolutionary biologist. In many species, adults don't play at all. Play for mammals is primarily a juvenile activity because play is the means of becoming an adult. Play is the means of practicing the kinds of skills, acquiring the kinds of skills you need to become an adult. But we are an interesting species, and there's a certain sense that we're always becoming, right? I mean, we don't reach a static state where we're living the same way all along. So there's a certain sense of development that continues into adulthood. And I think that's the reason why adults indeed do play. Now, but generally, so there's play, adults can play by the full definition that I'm giving to play. But I think that's not the most important part of playfulness for adults. So I distinguish between play and playfulness. Play, to be fully play, all those characteristics have to be there. But as adults, we have certain responsibilities. We've got to make a living, we've got to take care of our kids, we've got to do all these kinds of things. But I make the point we can do them in a playful way. We can do them to the degree that we can do them with a play-like attitude, to the degree that we can modify how we're doing it so that it has those qualities of play, to the degree that we are self-determined in it, that we are creating our own ways of doing it rather than following somebody else's dictates of how to do it, to the degree that we feel that we are bringing some imagination and creativity to it. All of those things make it more playful. There's actually studies about job satisfaction that I think could almost be characterized as to what degree is your job play for you. And it turns out that the kinds of jobs that people most like are the jobs that, first of all, have challenges, difficult jobs. People hate easy jobs. They're just boring. Difficult jobs. Play is always difficult because children are always at the cutting edge of they're always trying to get better at their doing. When kids play video games, they don't play they don't, like Angry Birds has a limited lifetime. Not very difficult, right? but the games that people like are difficult. They're very difficult. And then you get to the next level, and then you go to the next level. They're People say they're addictive. Well, if they're addictive, it's addictive because it's challenging. You're meeting one challenge after another. So kids are, whether it's video games or anything else, kids are trying to meet. So to the degree that your job has challenges that you're trying to meet, to that degree, it's like play. To the degree that it's boring, just routine. Fortunately, boring jobs have been largely taken over by computers and robots. So more and more jobs in theory can be playful today. To the degree that you can set your own time schedule, it's playful. All of those things. So in choosing a job, if you want to feel like you're playing a job, try to choose a job that has these characteristics. If you're stuck in a job that doesn't have the characteristics, are there ways that you can make it more playful?
Any other questions? Well, I actually have a list of them. Like you, I don't want to forget. Indoor versus outdoor play. Does it
Yes.
matter?
So it's play either way, and indoor play is clearly play. The advantages of outdoor play are the greater physical activity. Outdoor play, as I said, when kids are really free and there's a lot of kids to play with and no adults telling them not to do it, kids are playing in highly vigorous and often risky ways. The other thing about outdoor play is, generally speaking, you don't have to worry about breaking stuff. That you can throw rocks around and play in the mud and break twigs off of trees and they'll grow back. So you can roughhouse outdoors, whereas if you roughhouse in your house, then your mom might very well get mad at you because you might break something. So there's a lot of advantage to that. The other thing, I do believe that I'm an outdoor person. I grew up mostly outdoors when I wasn't in school. I'm sure I spent more time outdoors as a kid than I spent in school. So and I like to be outdoors. I like to be in nature, but I don't think that the great outdoors in nature is an instinctive love for children. I think what is an instinctive love for them is playing with other kids. And so if we want kids outdoors, the way we get them outdoors is to get other kids outdoors for them to play with. They will play outdoors if there's other kids to play with. Some of my studies are at a school where kids are free pretty much all day long to do what they want. And they could, in theory, be indoors on their computers all day long if they wanted to. But there's also lots of kids there, and there are outdoor kids, and there's always kids beckoning them to go out. Let's get up a game of softball. Let's go scramble over the rocks. Hey, let's go down to the creek and see if we can catch some frogs. You've got kids telling you to do that. That's very different than if the parent is saying, oh, let's go out and look at nature, or a teacher is telling you to that. The attraction is other kids to play with. One of the many positive results of that is you learn to enjoy the outdoors and feel comfortable in the outdoors.
Well, um, Peter, it's me and my grandson. And what advice do you have? Just so happened that really we're living in a neighborhood where there's not a lot of children, and the kids are visiting me, and I want to play, and he wants to play with me. What advice do you have for me in terms of not exercising a supervised play? Helping him play and yet enjoy it without me being helicoptering him, monitoring everything that he's doing. What do you advise for me? How can I make that play experience as enriching as it is if he's playing with another child? Or is that possible?
So let me talk about this kind of in general terms. So because we live in a culture where children don't have access to other children, we feel a need to play with our children. And that's understandable. And children feel a drive to want us to play with them. That's because they don't have children to play with. So, for example, I did some studies of hunter-gatherer cultures, and I have an anthropologist friend who studied children worldwide. And what I learned is parents don't feel any need to play with kids in those other cultures because the kids have lots of kids to play with. So there's no sense of, and the kids would rather play with other kids than with adults. A few years ago, because I was at that time writing a blog for Psychology Today, and I kept getting questions about should I play with my child? If so, how should I play with my child? And it's not something I'd given a lot of thought to. So I Googled the question. I Googled the question, should I play with my child? And I got a page of answers. And many of the answers were from moms who were saying something like this: I know I'm supposed to play with my child. And I'm so ashamed of myself for admitting this, but I hate playing with my child. And then they would go on and explain why they hated playing with their child. So one mom says, my son wants to play this game and it involves spinning a hoop around a certain amount of time. And he wants me to do it with him. And she says, I'll admit, for the first 100 times, it was kind of fun. But then he just keeps wanting to do that. And then there was another mom who said her daughter wants to play make believe games with her, wants to play, fantasy games. But her daughter wants to control the whole thing. So her daughter tells the mom exactly what part she has to play and what exactly she has to say. She's not allowing the mom to be creative. And so I wrote a blog post and I said, all right, so this mom is teaching her daughter to be a little tyrant. No self respecting child would accept being dictated to that way. And I discovered that moms in particular, they've learned this lesson. You're supposed to not impose yourself on the child. You're supposed to do what the child wants to do, but they go too damn far with it. And so it's not like child play, which is equal. The child who doesn't want to do this will say, I don't want to do this. We're going to have to find a way to play. So the first point I made is I can understand playing with it. I like to play with my child. There were certain times when I liked to play with my stepfather when I was a kid. But you have to find a way to play that's fun for both parties. Otherwise, it's not play. And there are such ways of play. So, for example, a way that dads more often than moms like to play with kids is rough and tumble play. Toss them up in the air, roll around in the grass, chasing around. I'm a monster. I'm going to catch you and eat you for breakfast. All of this kind of stuff. Kids love that. And it's fun for the adults, and you're going to exercise doing it. As children get a little bit older, you can play certain kinds of games that have enough of an element of luck that you don't have to pretend to lose. You can sometimes actually lose because there's an element of luck. And I remember enjoying family play nights where my grandmother and my stepfather and my brothers would all play games. We were very different in age and ability, but we used to really enjoy doing that. So I think that and then I should say, I talked about the mistake moms make, which is to give in to the child. Dads are more likely to make the opposite mistake. So here's a typical dad play with a kid. So let's play with Legos, right? Pretty soon the dad is creating this amazing Lego construction and the kid is just kind of bored, maybe going off to do something else. The dad loves this, but the dad sort of takes it over. I remember one time, I'll tell the story. I remember one time, so when my son was about 6 or 7 years old, we joined this group that called Indian Guides, which was supposed to be a bonding opportunity for dads and their sons. And you would meet with them. So they had this event at Indian Guides where every father son couple was given a little pine box, and you were supposed to build a car from that, carve it out and paint it and put wheels on it. And then you'd come back and have car races down a thing with this. So we went home and I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I had my son build the thing, and it looked like something that a 6-year-old would build. It was rickety. It was badly painted. I was proud of it. He was proud of it. We went there. oh my God, every car was perfectly carved, beautifully painted. It was like when you go to the bake sale and everybody's got these perfect cakes there that they actually bought and they're pretending they baked them, and you coming with your homemade cake and you just want to toss it in the garbage and go home. That's how we felt about this. It was very, very clear that those kids had no role except maybe watching in building those cars. So this is a mistake I think that dads make sometimes.
Right. Well, uh, that was great. That was a great answer. I love it. I'm asking you this question, but it's Kathy asking you that question. Um, I'm asking you this on her behalf. I'm actually sitting in front of the sandbox, and Johnny, who is 1 year old, is playing with Kristen, who is 3 years old, and they're playing with each other in the sandbox. But Kristen wants Johnny to play according to her rule. So she would take, every time he grabs a toy, she would take it away from him. Every time he tried to do something, she'll take it away from him. Well, Kathy determines she's going to intervene on behalf of Johnny. So Johnny does not get hurt and doesn't stop crying. Is Kathy really making it harder for these two children to negotiate and come up with an answer on their own without the adult interfering in that dialogue?
Right. I should clarify that pretty much everything I'm talking about is 4 years old and older. There's a transition that occurs around four. By around 4 years old, children have internalized language enough that they're able to think in terms of rules and safety and so on and so forth. Up until around four, children need to be guided, watched, need to be in many places guided, intervene. Now, what happens in maybe a hunter-gatherer culture or a culture where there's children of all ages? What happens there is that adults are not necessarily responsible for the little kids, but older kids are. And so you'll typically have, if you've got a 3 year old, I don't even know about a 1 year old, but a 2 or 3 year old might be out playing with their 5 year old sibling, along with the 5 year old sibling's friends and the little kids that those siblings are also minded. So you've got an age mixed group. And it turns out that little kids under age 4 can play pretty well with older kids because the older kids are scaffolding them into it. They're making sure that the old, but a 1 year old and a 3 year old can't generally do it unless you've got a highly precocious 3 year old. So that I am not in favor of just abandoning little kids to below the age of 4. It's interesting. This school that I study, where kids are free to, this school has a pond on it that you could theoretically drown in. There's a forest nearby that you could theoretically get lost in. There's a road where you could theoretically get run over on. And the kids are free to play and explore on their own with no adults following them around. The youngest kids that this school will accept are 4 year olds, because they believe that 4 year olds are capable of taking care of themselves, especially in this age mixed environment. The school has been in existence for now 56 years, and there's never been a really serious accident at the school. Far better safety record than the typical school. And I think it's partly because the kids know they're responsible for themselves and one another. But it is significant to me that they would not accept somebody under 4. They don't accept all 4 year olds either. In fact, of any age, you've got to have a visiting week at the school and prove during that visiting week that you're capable of caring for yourself. You're not going to, that you're capable of not doing dangerous things. You are kind of watched during that visiting week. So, and it's also significant to me that what the anthropologists say, the anthropologists talk about children up until about the age of 4 as infants. And infants need the care of usually the mother. And in fact, many children are being nursed up until close to 4 years old. And so they literally are being treated in some sense as infants. They have a lot of freedom to move around camp, do things. They're always doing things. They're playing. I've seen pictures of hunter-gatherer 2-year-olds playing with machetes, but they're doing it while there are adults around, or they're playing with fire. They're doing all these dangerous like things, but they're not off doing them by themselves or even with other kids. There's adults around doing it. But they speak of the one anthropologist said that they consider children by about 4 years old or a bit beyond to have common sense. And when they have common sense, then they can run off with the other kids and don't need to have an adult following them. It's interesting to me. I told that story about when I was 4 and my grandmother let me do that. She didn't let me do it when I was 3.
Oh, no, don't run. Uh, one more question. This is actually a question that I thought about after listening to our morning, Rebecca and Francine, and it's about the socioeconomic disparity that we have in our culture. The safety of my child in the neighborhood I live in Heartland, Wisconsin, is really not the same as it is the safety of my child living in the inner city of Milwaukee, in the south side of Milwaukee or part of the north side of Milwaukee. How do we, as a society, continue to uh, place such an importance on play, uh, especially outdoor plays, between children, and in a situation where we actually may be in a unsafe environment for them, that we do need to have supervision, we do need to have protection, we need to have some available adults to watch for them. How do we deal with that?
Well, of course, that's a very important question. But I want to start a little bit differently. So I do a lot of bicycling, and we used to live very close to the city of Worcester, Massachusetts, which is a very working class city. Has some neighborhoods that are fairly wealthy, some neighborhoods that are very poor. And I used to ride my bike around Worcester. But this was years ago. This was maybe 20 years ago. When I went through the poor neighborhoods, I saw kids outdoors. Kids were outdoors playing. They were playing the way I used to play. And they'd come out and I ride a goofy looking bike, a recumbent bike, and they'd want to try out my bike, and they would tease me about my bike. It was great. I would go through the wealthy neighborhoods. I didn't see a kid anywhere. Nobody outdoors. Safe neighborhood, nobody outdoors. Neighborhood people would say is dangerous, kids are outdoors. Now, if I ride around, no kids outdoors anywhere. No kids outdoors anywhere. I don't think that in those working class neighborhoods, the reason the kids are indoors is because they're so worried about safety. I think the kids are indoors because the parents are worried about child protective services. If you are accused of allowing a child outdoors playing without an adult watching them, somebody calls 911, there's a high chance that that you'll get a visit first from the police. And then once that call is in many states, including Massachusetts, there is a requirement for child protective services that they follow up. So some random person on the street who thinks they're doing a good deed because they see a child that they think is in danger calls 911, and you get a visit from Child Protective Services. Now, we have a lawyer related to the Let Grow organization who's an expert on this and who defends families when they're charged. She says that the way the law is enforced is heavily skewed. So if you are Black and poor and somebody calls 911, the chance that your child will be taken away is far greater than if you are white and wealthy. So I think that I don't want to diminish the realistic fears that occur, the realistic dangers that occur. But I think the bigger problem is fear of child protective services. We have created a society that regards what I would think of as healthy, appropriate parental behavior as negligence. Every parent in my era, if they were subjected to the same rules, would be in jail by now for their negligence. Child Protective Services started to protect children from abuse, and that was a good thing. Children who are being abused at home, physically or sexually abused, need the protection of the state. But nowadays, 90% of the cases that they deal with are not abuse, it's negligence. Negligence has become what Child Protective Services works on. Abuse is the bad things you do to your child. Negligence is what you're not doing to your child. Now, clearly, there's some things would be negligent. Not feeding your child is negligent. But is it negligent to allow your child to walk to school? Yes, you might be charged with negligence for doing that. Is it negligent to allow your child on a shady day with the windows cracked in your car and you're going to run into the grocery store for a few minutes while your 8-year-old child is sitting in the car? Is that negligence? Some parents did all the time now. I know cases of people who've had to go to court for exactly that because they were charged with negligence. We have become insane in our charges of negligence. And I think that is a huge, huge reason why even those parents who know that it's safe for their kid to do this or that, know safe for their 12-year-old to be home babysitting the 7-year-old for a few hours, know that it's safe to let the kid sit in the car with the windows down and the door unlocked on a shady day while they run into the store and the kid doesn't want to go into the store, that they're afraid to do it because there's no law saying you can't do these things. But the problem is the Child Protective Services has free range of interpretation. It's their judgment over the parent's judgment as to whether this was negligent or not. Now, that's another thing we're taking on through the Let Grow organization. We have worked with a number of states and passed in some states what are called reasonable independence laws. And basically what these laws state, they're passed through the state legislature. Basically what the law states is that it's up to parents and not the state to decide what's safe for the parent's child, unless any reasonable person looking at it in common sense would say that this is dangerous. Now, lawyers have a fit with that kind of a qualification. What is common sense? What is all this and that? But we've managed to pass these in quite a number of states already. This gives a backup. It doesn't immediately solve the problem because it takes a while even for people to catch on. But the Child Protective Services know it. They know that this is now the law. And so they are far less inclined to press negligence because the parents can come back and point to that law. And we even arm parents with little cards about the law that they can hand out. So that's another way we're working through Let Grow to try to bring parental rights back into play in terms of allowing children to go out and play and do things independently. You have a question? Please. Right. Right. So, so, so why is it that kids feel unsafe? And there are some situations where you truly are unsafe, and I don't want to minimize that. There are families that are unsafe. There are situations that are unsafe. There's some neighborhoods where it's unsafe, although I think we exaggerate to the degree to which the neighborhoods are unsafe. The I think kids feel unsafe. Even kids who are in what anybody would say is the safest neighborhood in the world are unsafe because they don't have an internal locus of control. They feel vulnerable. They've been treated as if they're vulnerable, and that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're treated like you're fragile and vulnerable, that's the self-image you develop. I'm fragile and vulnerable. If you're treated as if you're tough, you can take care of things, you can fail, and you can rise from that, then that protects you from anxiety. But I don't want to say that's the only problem. Many surveys have been done. There's a saying in psychotherapy, at least in some types. If you want to know what's bothering somebody, ask them. Right. So what do the studies show that when you're asking kids themselves, what is it that makes you anxious? Overwhelmingly, it's school. Nothing else comes close. So, for example, the American Psychological Association does, I think, every year a study called Stress in America, but usually it's only adults over 18, in which they survey cross demographic sample about how anxious have you been for the last couple of weeks, what are the sources of anxiety. So in 2013, they happened to include teenagers, high school age kids. High school age kids came out by their self ratings as the most anxious people in America. There's a checklist of what makes you anxious. Far and away, the most checked thing was school. School, 87% checked school. The next leading, they could check more than one thing. The next thing was worried about getting into college or getting a job. Bullying, family problems, way down the list. School is at top. Interestingly, the previous time that the APA included teenagers happened to be in 2009. And so 4-year difference. Something happened between 2009 and 2013, and that is that school became far more stressful than it had been before because of Common Core, which greatly limited teachers' abilities to adapt their teaching style to the kids' needs, where teachers now had to teach a common curriculum aimed at tasks because the teachers were judged based on standardized tests. Numerous studies showing that everybody became more anxious in school. Teachers became more anxious, kids became more anxious. So in 2009, same questionnaire. Again, teenagers ranked high. They weren't the most stressed out people, but they were high even in 2009 before Common Core. But 43% checked school. It was still the most checked item, but the number that checked school was doubled after Common Core came into place. Not very many people who are worried about teen anxiety talk about school as the primary cause of it, but there's no question but what school is the primary cause of it. So I've done an analysis of looking across countries of rises in anxiety, depression over the period beginning about 2010 up until about 2018. Now, as some of you know, people like Jonathan Haidt believe it's because of the cell phone and iPhone and being on social media so much. The evidence for that is extraordinarily weak. I've gone through the evidence. In fact, I'd say overwhelmingly the evidence disproves that hypothesis. One of the disproofs comes from cross-cultural evidence that when you look at the entire European Union, those kids are not deprived of cell phones, they're not deprived of social media, but they did not have anything like Common Core that changed the school system. Over that same period of time that we saw this huge rise in anxiety and depression between 2010 and 2018, they saw a decline, a slight decline in depression and anxiety. The exception was Sweden. Sweden made education change very similar to our Common Core. Another exception was the UK, England in particular. They made a change in education in 2015, a little bit later than we did. That's when they saw an increase in anxiety, depression, and suicide. We can look across cultures and we can map changes in teen anxiety, depression, and suicide onto what school is doing to them. This should not be surprising to us. Children spend more time in school than any place else except home. More time in school than any place else. And in school, they are not free. In school, they are required to do what the school is telling them to do. Should it surprise us that a nationwide change that makes school more stressful for everybody involved is going to increase anxiety, depression, and suicide? The other bit of data here is that we have long known that suicides, mental health admissions among school-age kids track the school year. Every summer they go down, and then they go back up again when school starts. They went down during COVID. They went down during the lockdown, and they went back up again when schools opened. It's a big change. The rate of admissions for mental health emergencies for school-age kids during the month of July, which is the one month when all schools essentially are on vacation, is half what it is during the school year. This is a big effect. There's no question but it's school. But in our culture, school has a halo around it. Nobody wants to say it's school. People want to blame those greedy social media companies. We can blame them. That's the devil. But we cannot blame school. We've got to face the fact. We are doing this to kids through what we're doing to them in school.
Carol?
I'm sorry, I'm a little hard of hearing.
Thank you, Peter. That was excellent. I've been looking at blogs and they're really, really thought provoking. Just one thing that you said there about how depression and anxiety went down over COVID. We've done a big analysis of Australian children's data, and it definitely showed an uptick in depression, anxiety, and stress in 2020. And I don't know if you've seen that data come out. It was like a really large longitudinal study, and I think it was JAMA Pediatrics. But yeah, a really big jump, like increase in 2020. Yeah, just it sounds like that's different to what you have seen in other data sets.
I'm sorry, because of my hearing problem, I'm not. Can somebody repeat the question to me or say it a little differently?
Yeah, what Carol was saying is that the studies in Australia noted that during COVID, the opposite was noted in respect to the level of anxiety that children in school were experiencing. It was actually slightly more than less.
So people have talked about increases in behavior problems and anxiety and so on when kids went back to school. So this is another thing we did with Let Grow. And So we did a study. We were interested in how families were adapting to the lockdown when suddenly there was this dramatic change. Kids who had been spending all their time in school and all these extracurricular activities, suddenly all of that was shut down. And suddenly all these things that were occupying their time were shut down and they were stuck at home for the most part. And of course, there were a lot of predictions that kids would suffer as a result of this. So we wanted to test that prediction. So we did a study, a demographically balanced study. We did it twice. So schools locked down in March of 2020, middle of March. We did the first survey in the middle of April, 1 month after schools locked down, and the second survey in the middle of May, 2 months after schools locked down. In each survey, we surveyed 1,600 families. Families were selected since they were families with kids between the age of 8 and 13. In half of the surveys, we asked the questions of the kids. In the other half, we asked the questions of the parents. One of the questions, so to give you a sample of the questions, one of the questions asked the kids, are you more anxious now or less anxious than you were before COVID started? The great majority said less anxious. The parents, when asked, are your kids more anxious or less anxious than they were before? The great majority said less anxious. We asked the question of the parents, are you getting along with your kids better or worse now than you were before the lockdown? The great majority said better. These all ran counter to what everybody was predicting. So much so, and I could go through many other such questions. One other question we asked the kids sort of in a free written thing to describe their experiences, you know, their emotional experiences, what they did and so on. A lot of them said things like, well, first I was bored. I didn't know what to do. And then I discovered this and this and this. And they started to go on and doing all these reading books I want to read, playing games. My mom taught me how to cook dinner. Wow, I can now cook dinner. They were discovering in the state of Massachusetts where I live, and I was saying that I'm a bicyclist. I never would see kids out riding bicycles. During COVID, I saw kids out riding bicycles. For the first time, I saw kids riding bicycles. I saw parents teaching there. It was something you could do while socially isolating. So when I sent this in for publication, the editor was a little surprised because so many supposed experts were saying kids were suffering. Even though the health records showed that there was lower mental health, there were fewer admissions, psychiatric admissions than there were before. Even so, people were saying that. And there were some studies saying that anxiety increased. But the way those studies, notice that I said, are you more anxious or less anxious than before? These studies said, are you anxious? Well, of course, everybody's anxious. You ask the study in a way that presumes the answer, and you're going to get the answer you want. So the studies that showed increased anxiety were biased studies by and large part. I was very happy that before my article was published, 3 other studies came out showing the same thing using very different methods. So one study was had been following for years, for over time, a group of teenagers, sort of tracking their anxiety record, asked them about their anxiety, and things were better during that period of time than they had been before. There was a study in the UK that found the same thing, and there was a study in Germany that found the same thing. So the actual studies do not show. This does not mean that there weren't some kids that were, you know, this was a terrible thing. This was a terrible event, and no surprise, some families suffered from it, and the kids suffered. But all in all, taken as a whole, the typical kid, and the same thing was true across social classes. We balanced. We had people. We looked at it by race. We looked at it by socioeconomic category. No difference on any of this. No, didn't make any difference. they were they were by their own reports doing better during that period than after. Now, once they went back to school, I haven't done any studies looking at that. And I hear all these reports about how difficult things were when they went back to school. One thing we know is a lot of people didn't go back to school. That the rate of homeschooling greatly increased after COVID, partly because some families discovered, hey, it's not so bad having my kids at home, and my kids are happier not going to school. So the rate of homeschooling doubled during that after that time, and to some degree it slipped back a little bit, but it's still much higher now than it was before COVID. So I don't believe that it had this devastating effect. I don't see the evidence for it.
So you mentioned year or age 4 sort of being that early threshold for self-governance, can sort of take care, follow rules, start to understand social structure in mixed age groups. Is there an upper threshold where play becomes maybe not less important, but as we get into those teenage years, it's less creative mind and we're starting to get higher reasoning functions. Where does play cease to be as important for children?
Yeah, good question. So play does all in all change over time on average with age. The first thing I want to say is that to me, the most natural situation for play is age mixed play, where the age mixing includes kids from maybe 4 through at least early teenage years. When you look at hunter-gatherer cultures, that's the typical play group. You've got you got this range of ages. I have studied play at this school where there's kids from age 4 on through teenage years. And I see a lot of mixed age play. It's outdoor, vigorous, rough and tumble play. I see games. In some sense, the little kids keep the older kids interested in really vigorous and also in creative play. So there's a point in our culture where a lot of kids think I'm too old to be coloring or to be playing with blocks or to be painting, unless you are destined to be an artist. But when you see a lot of little kids doing this, you kind of get inspired to do it. So I see in that setting, which I think is a more natural setting, I see older kids playing in ways that are not that different from the way the little kids are playing, often with the little kids. Often, they're building Lego stuff. They're big, and often they're playing in a mixed way. That having been said, I think that play does evolve as that early on, kids are playing in highly creative ways, often very vigorous play, often very lively play. The rules change more quickly because they don't hold on to the rules so long, and so on and so forth. As kids get older, the play tends to get a little bit more formalized. So they may be playing board games, or they may be playing, even if they're playing pickup games of baseball or soccer, it becomes looking a little bit more like actual baseball and soccer. Uh, and often what happens is when I describe you get interested in something, playing with something, it becomes what when you get older we'd normally call a hobby. So let me take one example. I pointed out at this school that I observe a lot of the kids start off playing with something and then they go on for that as a career. Let me just, as one example, there was one of the people in one of my studies who was a young woman at the time of my study, and she had been a student all her student days at this school where she could play most of the time. And she described how, as a child, she loved playing with boats in the little pond, little toy boats. She was fascinated by boats. She was fascinated by water. She played with water. As she got older, she began to read about boats. She became interested and she began to read about tides. she developed the dream of becoming a ship captain. By the time so is this play? Or, I would say it's still play, but it's formalized play, but it's also very directed training of herself for her future. By the time she was a teenager, she was taking advantage of the very liberal off-campus policy of the school to apprentice herself. This school is in Massachusetts. Apprentice herself to a ship captain on Cape Cod. By the time she was in her early 20s, at the time I was studying her, she was captain of a cruise ship. She would say she's still playing, so, but I think what I'm describing is sort of an evolution from I'm just dabbling with this and dabbling at that. And now I'm actually kind of a little more intensely interested in playing with this because this really is a passion for me. And now I'm actually kind of thinking about this in relation to my future. At some point, I'm going to have to make a living. How do I want to make a living that will be a happy life for me? That is the sequence I would like to see in more people. And I see that I can trace for about half the people I've studied in this kind of, who've been educated in this kind of way, where they're really in charge of their own education. For about half the people I've studied, I can see a direct relationship like the one I just described between what they were playing at as children and what they are now doing as adults.
That's great. Right. Go ahead. One last question.
I'm sorry.
Play club in the middle school setting.
Play club.
In the middle school setting.
I wish it was in the middle of school setting. We can't get any schools to do that. So they're not willing to give up so-called instruction time. It's hard enough to get them recesses at all.
Right.
But we would love to see it. My actual dream is this. So play club is not enough. It's like, I think the reason it's helpful is for the same reason that a cup of water in the desert is helpful, right? This is 1 hour a week. This should be every day. It should be several hours every day. But even 1 hour a week is a heck of a lot better than nothing. And it has a lasting effect in that the kids get to know one another. They become more playful with one another, even in the classroom. The teachers become more playful. So it has an effect beyond that hour. And we've got a study going on this, and the study is done, but the data haven't been analyzed yet. To a systematic study in New Hampshire, where some schools did play clubs, some did not, and we're looking at a multitude of effects of it. One of the effects I'm hoping for is that the kids in play club, number one, learn they love to play. Number two, they make friends and they get together with those friends and play out of school as well. That it initiates a playful attitude. I can't say that that's happening because we don't yet have data analyzed on that. What I would really love play clubs to evolve into is that every school after school would be open for free play like this between the time when the school day ends and parents are home from work. That would solve the babysitting problem. It would provide several hours of real play in a safe setting because it's at school. There'd be adults there. It'd be very inexpensive to do this. You just need a couple of adults to be there for safety. Everything else is there. There's no reason under the sun we can't do that if we had the will to do it. There are some schools moving a little bit in that direction, having play club more than 1 day a week and having it after school. But so far, I don't know any schools that are doing what I'm saying. But this is what happened naturally in the past at all schools without any adult there. Kids would just hang out after school and play. But now I'm saying, let's let them hang out after school and play with the safety of having a couple of adults there for safety, because otherwise parents aren't going to allow the kids to stay. I would think parents would love this because it solved the babysitting problem during that time. I think actually the break against it is our obsession with school and tutoring. People want to have tutoring programs after school as if they haven't had enough school in school. People want to put their kids in adult-directed sports because they think somehow their kids will be left behind and won't develop as good a college resume. They're not doing that. So in some sense, the key to all of this is changing attitudes so that people understand how important that in fact self-directed play is more important for the child's long-term development, more important for their long-term happiness. I think even more important for their getting a good job in the future than doing well in school or doing well in adult-directed sports.
On that note, I really, really, truly appreciate Dr. Gray. This was an incredible speech, and I'm sorry that the discussion lasted a little bit longer, and I'll take my note. So thanks, everybody. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this evening, and we will get here tomorrow. Breakfast is at 8, and session starts at 9 in the morning. Have a good night. Hope you have a good rest. See you soon.